Lot of notes today. Okay, so we're going to jump right into those notes. Okay, we're going to talk about this herd mentality idea, and then we will also talk about just an overview of culture as a whole. Okay, herd mentality, and then an overview of culture. I kind of hit on this or hinted at it a little bit the other day. I said that we sometimes we conform so often and so easily that it kind of makes it seem like we are animal-like. We have this herd type of mindset. And does anybody remember the explanation that I gave? Now, are we, actually animals? On a physiologically, biologically, it's not the same. We have the prefrontal cortex that enables us to think at a higher level, right? But what's the explanation? Why is it that we have a tendency to do that, Ms. Barr?
We get rewarded by our brain.
What's that?
We get rewarded by our brain.
Okay, so there is the reward centers for conforming. That's true. I mentioned a different explanation, though. If we weren't, we conform often because that means we don't have to do what? We don't have to do what, Miss Argo?
You don't have to think about what you're doing.
Exactly. We don't have to do so much cognitive juggling and flexing our mental muscles, right, Mr. Rosinski? And it's easier for us to just go along with what everybody else is doing. What's everybody else got the answer for, right? I'll just go that way. And it makes life easier for us. It's an easy way out. Okay, so that's why the herd mentality is associated with conformity. Okay, so a couple scenarios. I'm going to add to this one here in a second. You guys remember the announcement that was out a couple weeks ago about people in the parking lot, students in the parking lot? What was going on, Miss Argo?
They were working in their own spaces.
Wrong spaces. Are you that person?
No.
Okay, I wouldn't expect and anticipate it. I do have to ask though. After you said you'd hit the hitter yesterday, so but I do appreciate your honesty there. Anybody want to fess up that they were that person that's parking in the wrong spot? Dylan? No. Miss Destiny? No. Miss Rosinski?
Oh yeah, I definitely did.
You did?
Yeah, I parked in a random spot.
You did?
Because literally no one parks there every year.
No one parks there every year, but it's in the parking
It's
lot.
in the very back spot.
Very back spot.
I parked there.
But haven't paid for it. And you got a ticket for it.
No, detention.
You got a detention for it. Okay.
Yeah, I took the L.
Well, that's the idea. Ticket detention. That's your version of a ticket for high school.
Way out ticket detention ticket.
All right. So, anybody else? No? Okay. So, the announcement was out there a lot, right? Quite often. And one problem with that is the purpose is trying to get people to curb their behavior. So, every time that you heard that announcement, what did you think, Mr. Rosinski?
I don't really listen to announcements.
You don't listen to announcements.
No,
But did you hear the announcement? That's the question.
I don't think I did.
You didn't hear the
Yeah,
announcement.
'cause the teacher was pretty the same.
Okay. All right. Well, we can't come up with a hypothetical then.
I could just say I heard it if you want.
No, I can't do that. It doesn't work very well. Okay.
Yeah, dress code.
So if you were okay, we can use that in a second. So, does that make you want to stop doing that? Right? Stop parking in the wrong
If I
spot.
heard it, maybe I'd switch it up a couple days and then go back.
And then you go back, right? But it's not going to necessarily ultimately deter your behavior.
Probably not.
No, okay? In a way, it actually does the opposite, right?
Yeah.
It does. For that particular individual, it actually says, hey, I'm not the only one that's doing it. Somebody else is doing it too. So, and some others are like, I thought about doing it, but I haven't done it yet. But now everybody's doing it, so I might as well do it too. Because everybody's getting away with it. It normalizes the bad behavior, is what it does. Okay. We'll go back to that idea. We'll talk about yesterday's yesterday's bell work. I'm sorry, our word of the day context as well. All right, let's get to Bogota, Colombia. So the context in Bogota in the 1990s, early 2000s, their traffic was awful. Okay, traffic was terrible. It was like there's no rules out there. Nobody follows the rules, and it's just chaos. It's a really inefficient system. Um, you know, things were bringing up. People were getting hurt. They had not only bad traffic, but then they had high rates of crime associated with it. Murder rates were really high, actually, as well. There's an interesting statistic that says that when it comes to murder and this idea of hit and run cases, I know that this is what we're doing here is we're taking emotions away from any type of murder. Of course, is awful, right? I'm not in no way saying that is permissible, but police have a difficult time at tracking you down if you do it in a hit and run type of manner. Those hit and runs are much less likely to be convicted and than death by any other way, right? Or murder by any other way. Okay, so you can take that into consideration. Take that statistic and then throw it into here. You got to understand that a lot of people are dying and then people are getting away with it. So it was called the Jungle down there in Bogota. So they had this guy that comes. He's elected mayor, and ironically, his name is Marcus. Okay, I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. His name is Marcus, and what he started to do was he started to use this concept of conformity to his advantage, right? And the way he applied it was this concept of shaming, okay? So he had two really popular methods to shape the behavior of these of people that were driving in Bogota, Colombia. First method was these cards. He started passing out cards to everybody, right? You had two cards. You had one with the thumbs up sign, and then you had one red one with the thumbs down. Okay, so the idea was if you see somebody doing something that they should be doing, following the rules, right? You appreciate it, you give them thumbs up, right? Give them a thumbs up sign. That one probably wasn't used as often as the other one. The red one, the thumbs down sign, is if you see somebody that's not doing what they should be doing, then you break out the thumbs down sign and you show it to them. Now, when it really works is if you get everybody, involved, and everybody's taking this thumbs down sign and just showing it to you. You realize that you're the person that's the recipient of that because you've done something wrong, right? You've been shamed, right, by everybody else around you, okay? And it makes you want to conform, right? It makes you want to stop doing what you've been doing because everybody else knows about it, okay? So that was one method, and it worked quite effectively, okay? Especially since everybody had those cards available to them. You see somebody pull out the red card. All right, where's it at? Pull out the red card. So everybody's pulling out the red card, pointing to that one particular person, okay? Get them to conform really fast that way. The other idea that he had was he started hiring all these mimes, okay? And what he would do is put them on these streets, sidewalks, street corners, and he told them, anytime that you see somebody doing something wrong, you start to imitate what they're doing, emulate what they're doing, right? And so this was a interesting method and effective as well in which shaming worked. Because if you're driving down the road and you look over to this mime that's off to the side, and he's doing the exact same that you're doing, then you realize that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. You know what I mean? And then everybody's looking at it and they're laughing at him and stuff, and then you realize they're all laughing at you. So there's this social pressure forcing you to conform to the norms, right? So these methods, they worked. They worked really well. Homicide rates, hit and run idea, dropped dramatically. Traffic fatalities decreased by 60%. It created a more civilized type of atmosphere in Bogota, Colombia. Shaming sent a message: if you need help, the people around you are here to put you into your place, right? They'll help you, make the correct decisions, conform to the norms that's been established, right? So, One thing that I want you to think about, real quick though, is when does shaming not work? You know, because we talk about shaming, sometimes I share this with students and then they think that it justifies their shaming behavior, so they go out and start shaming people, right? You gotta be really careful with shaming, because it can backfire on you pretty fast. Anybody got any ideas when shaming could not work? Ms. Listy?
Teaching children.
Teaching children, okay. And so give me more of an example here.
Like if a kid asks for an example on how to do something and then they do it wrong, they're going to be more afraid to do it next time.
Okay, that can be, and especially if the teacher becomes sarcastic and starts making fun of them, right? You know, they're shaming in that particular method, okay? And so what's the mindset of that student then?
If they do it, then they're going to get it wrong no matter what.
Okay,
And get
all right,
made fun of.
all right. If they get made fun of by the teacher, their mindset is for the remainder of the semester, what are they going to try to do? They're going to try to figure out a way to,
Avoid the teacher.
well, that could be so. Some students may do that. Some students, what they do, a lot of them, they'll try to reciprocate. You made fun of me, I'm going to try to find a spot where I can call you out and make fun of you in front of everybody. You made fun of me in front of everybody, I'm going to make fun of you somehow, some way, okay? In front of everybody. And that works a lot. You know, you use the situation of having a problem, you know, a particular question in class. What if it was like misbehavior is something I think about quite a bit, you know. Student gets really frustrated, teacher gets frustrated, upset. So what do? They call the student out in front of their peers, make fun of them, right? And then they, you know, they create this animosity. So they've shamed them, but there's only one of them doing the shaming. Does everybody see how that works? If there's only one of you doing the shaming, how much social pressure is there to conform? There's not as much as if you had, you know, the whole street is pulling out the red card, right? The whole street is pulling out the red card and you're the only one. Yeah, you're going to quickly conform in that scenario. Ms. Harper?
What about if the person doing the shaming
Is a hypocrite? Yeah. And again, hypocrite is one, right? If you got a whole bunch of hypocrites together, those hypocrites may be effective, right? They may be able to accomplish their goal. Right? But I doubt that many hypocrites getting together could work together cooperate with one another in the first place. All right, so why do we conform? You know, we've looked at aspects of conformity with Ash. We've looked at Milgram and conformity. These social economists, Associated Freakonomics Radio, they have their own answers. They say that it goes back to like this traditional proverb, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. It's more applicable to like a collectivistic type of society. Now, we're more of an individualist society, but still kind of applies to our context, where the group is more important than the individual in a collectivistic society. If you're going off and doing your own, the group puts a lot of pressure on you to conform, to get back with everybody else. You know, we've mentioned, you know, the lack of cognitive activity that we exert ourselves with sometimes. That's why we conform so much. It's easy just to check out what everybody else is doing. It's a good shortcut to decide what we should do. It does not acquire much cognitive capacity, okay? So does that mean we are the equivalent of herd animals? Not necessarily. We have the cognitive potential to do some pretty impressive things. It's just a matter of us flexing our mental muscles sometimes, right? We just have a tendency to revert to the path of least resistance quite often, right? And that's what's the simplest out, okay? All right, so another scenario that emphasizes the aspect of conformity. I think Mr. O'Hanlon's biology class, is anybody in that class? Yeah, so I think he's referenced this before. Ms. Nora Robinson shared that with me this morning. So they had this research where they were trying to curb energy consumption. And so they took a couple different methods by which they could try to get people in this particular community to stop using so much energy, okay? So one method, the first method that they went out to do is just, you know, promote this idea of environmentalism, okay? Reduce, reuse, recycle, okay? It's just good for the environment, good stuff, right? The second method that they chose for this particular community to decrease energy consumption was, hey, you're going to save money. All right, it's gonna be good for you. That means more money to spend on something else that you may enjoy. Okay, and then the third effort was to reach out to their hearts and make them feel like they were responsible for generations down the road. You think about your children, your children's children, right? You curb energy, it's gonna make the environment much better for them later on down the road. Okay, so that was the third effort. And then the fourth effort was actually a map. They put a map out there, and what it did was it just calculated everybody's energy consumption, and they just showed it to everybody. And what you could do is you could take a look at how much you consumed, how much energy consumed, and how much energy your neighbors consumed. That's all they really did was just pass out that map. Okay. Of these four, which one do you think was the most effective? What was that? The map. Right, the map was the most effective one. The other three, they didn't do anything. All right, they didn't really make much of a difference at all. Okay, why do you think the map works so much?
Because you're seeing what the neighbors are doing, and if you would be lower than what they are.
Exactly.
Better than what they
Exactly. So it's essentially shaming, but it's in a form of a map, right? If I'm the only person on my street that's consuming a heck of a lot more, energy than everybody else on my street, then what does that mean for me? It means I gotta change my behavior, right? And everybody else knows about it because they've seen the map too, right? So they know that I'm sticking out like a sore thumb. So now our conversations are gonna be different every time that we have a conversation with somebody on the street anymore because they know that I'm the guy that's wasting all the energy. So it shames you into conforming. Okay. The only one worked. That was the last one. Okay. The participants in this survey, those in the community, they were asked a couple questions, and one of them was, "What was the least motivating sign for you when it came to changing behavior?" You know what? When they answered, yeah, the map. They said that the map was the least motivating, but the reality was the map was the one that changed their behavior. So it kind of gives us a little bit of a clue about what we think actually works in the society in which we live. Right? We think that these public messages that are out there, and we fund them, we put all this money into them, right? We think that those are the ones that are working, but they're not, right? We need to, have an idea of how conformity works and use a more effective method to shape people's behavior, okay? Secret to the universe, what those around us are doing powerfully influences what we do next. We are basically herd animals. I've had students in class where I give them a question. Sometimes I may catch them off guard or something like that. Or maybe it's kind of an emotionally driven question, somewhere along the lines of, what's cool or what's attractive or something like that. And in that particular context, the student doesn't want to answer because they want to know what everybody else thinks, right, first before they ever say anything. Okay? I've even had situations where students will say that. What does everybody else think, right, before they give their answer? We're really concerned about others rather than making a decision on our own. Okay. All right. So I mentioned this boomerang effect with shaming and public messages. Sometimes they do the opposite of what we'd like them to accomplish. Okay. So with our public messages, this is like drinking and driving, texting and driving. I imagine you've heard those before. Our message yesterday, anybody remember our message yesterday with our Upfront magazine article from yesterday in class? Anybody remember what that was about? It was Miss Argo?
E-cigarettes.
E-cigarettes, okay, so Upfront's got a public message here all about e-cigarettes stuff, okay? Sometimes they don't accomplish what they set out to accomplish, and they actually do the exact opposite of what they set out to accomplish, okay? So you can even think about the announcement with the parking spaces. It kind of did. How long did that thing run? I got tired of having to read it every day, right? Evidently, it was not getting the job done. Kept coming back. It's the wrong strategy. It normalizes the undesirable behavior. Everyone else is doing it, must be all right. Got a personal example. When I was in middle school, in 6th grade, we had the DARE program. You guys remember the DARE program? You guys ever done that? Gone through that, right? So the DARE program talks about, the dangers of drugs, dangers of tobacco use, the dangers of alcohol consumption. So we have this, it's like a 9-week program. Once a week, come in, have this conversation with this police officer. He tells us all these things, right? At the end, we have this commitment, to lead a drug-free life, right? So we all sign the papers. Time goes by. A couple years later, we get to high school. I grew up in a fairly low-income type of environment, very small, rural town in East Central Illinois. If we get to high school, what do you think starts happening? Yeah, people start, you just look out of the parking lot after school and there's, so many cigarettes butts all over the place, right? People smoking, there's people drinking, just all that stuff's going on, right? And you're thinking, we all did the DARE program together, right? And why does this happen? We all made that commitment. So sometimes what it does is it does the opposite. It actually teaches you the deviant behavior, and it normalizes it. It makes it seem like, well, there's a lot of people out there that are doing it. One more won't necessarily hurt it. So again, we got to be careful with these public announcements, the way that we do it. So it's one reason why I'm kind of hesitant sharing that stuff with you yesterday about the e-cigarette stuff, right? Just the idea of talking about it kind of normalizes the behavior. Petrified forests is another example, very specific. This is out in Arizona, and it's a unique kind of context. This forest, because of the environment and the dry air, it's actually preserved these forests, the trees, and it's made them into like almost rock formations, right? And it's some pretty cool stuff. The problem is, it's just way out in the open, and you really can't keep people from, taking some of the artifacts that are from the petrified forest. So they put up signs. Because there are so many people stealing from the forest floor at the rate of nearly a ton a month, it's undermining the integrity of the forest, right? So when people see that sign, at least those people without any sense of integrity, they think we better get ours now, because they're not going to be there for very long. The sign nearly tripled the theft compared to the control setting. Okay? It increased theft. It did the exact opposite of what it was trying to accomplish. Okay? So they got to figure out a different way, a different method. You might as well not even put the sign out there in the first place. Okay? We might as well not put it in the announcements. We might have to figure out a different way to use shaming more effectively, and getting students to park in the right spot, right? So we'll have to think about that a little bit differently. Shame's a wonderful punishment. It's free. That's what Steve Levitt, the social economist, says. And what's wrong with it, though, there's one fallacy associated with shaming, other than what we mentioned earlier, backlash. Someone has to be willing to shame. It depends on the reaction. Some people like the non-conformist label, right? They like to be seen as the deviants, and that identity is something that they pride themselves with. And when you try to shame that individual, it doesn't work very well, right? It's not necessarily going to work. Okay? All right, let's change modes, going away from conformity and shaming. In the herd mentality, we talk about an overview of culture. There's some test questions in here, so I'll try to highlight them as we go through here. All people living on Earth are what? Biologically, what do we call it? Homo sapiens. Okay, so there are certain characteristics of universality that all of us have, right? However, we do have some differences, right? And our differences are expressed in our what? Culture. Our differences are expressed in our culture. Now, I do want to say, Hans Rosling, we've mentioned him before. He says that, if you find somebody on the other side of the world that has about the equivalent income as you do, life's going to be just about the same, right? It's going to be very, very similar, okay? Then as what your life is right now. So sometimes we overemphasize the differences. We get lost in the differences, which are actually fairly small, okay? We're actually more similar than different. So what is culture? We defined it the other day simply as a way of life, right? A way of life. It's a really important concept. It gives us a sense of identity. Without culture, we would be lost. We would be identity-less, okay? It's what we think. It's how we act. It's what we own. There are two specific types of culture that we're going to start off with. We're going to get more types of culture later on, but you've got non-material culture and you have material culture. Material culture is concrete, all right? Something that you can touch, you can taste it, you can feel it. It's got substance to it, okay? So the utensils, tools that you're using to complete your work here at school, that's material culture, whether it be your Chromebook or your paper or pencil, right? Clothes that you wear is material culture. That's simple. You can see it, touch it, taste it. Non-material culture is a little bit more difficult to define, okay, because it is abstract, okay? You can't touch it, taste it, and feel it, right? But you can still see it sometimes. Like non-verbal language and ideas are an aspect of non-material culture. Cultural norms, right? Unwritten rules. You don't necessarily see it. Or I'm sorry, you don't necessarily feel it, touch it, taste it, but you can see it, right? That's an aspect of non-material culture. I'll give you one to think about. It just popped in my mind the other day. I find it humorous when sometimes we have young people try to emulate what they see on TV. So right now in the NBA and in basketball, when you shoot a three and you make a three, what do? How do you react? What's the cool thing to do? Anybody know what the cool thing to do? What is Dylan? Right here, right. Got it. Got the three ball, right? And then they walk back down and put it in their holster, right? As they go back down the floor, okay? You ever done that, Austin? No? You made the big three the other night against, who'd you make? GCMS, right? Make the two big threes. What if you come back down and go over here to the fan section, student section, go like this, like that? Think they would have erupted. I had a freshman this past year. Didn't make very many threes. He shot a lot of threes. Didn't make very many of them, right? He made one three in a game against PCC. It was at the end of the quarter. He makes the three, comes back down to half court, goes like this, and then comes over towards me and goes like this. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I was like, that's like basket number 3, and you're doing that? That is nuts. So that's an aspect of non-material culture. Our non-verbals, our behavior, our mannerisms, and that's non-verbal culture, okay, or non-material culture. Non-material. Culture shapes our lives and helps form our personalities. Shapes our lives and helps form our personalities. Sometimes we look at the concept of personality and we think that it is genetic, right? That it's ingrained, it's biological. It's something that's passed down from your folks down to you, right? And there is some aspect of it, but a lot of it is contingent upon the culture in which you live that shapes your identity and personality. Cultural differences create tension and ethnocentrism. Cultural differences create tension and ethnocentrism. Okay? Ethnocentrism, this is a good test question here. This is a term that we throw out in global cultures quite a bit. It's a big term, so we try to define it in one word. We use one-word definitions to try to help us remember what these big words are. Somebody remember the one-word definition for ethnocentrism? Ms. Maddie? Judgment. You know, so it's the judgment of another culture based upon the standards of one's own. It's kind of complex. The judgment of another culture based upon the standards of one's own. I heard it phrased a couple different ways. The other day I heard a good one. It said it was kind of, ethnocentrism is kind of like the measuring stick that you use to look at other cultures, right? It's the measuring stick. Where's the measuring stick come from? Well, you created the measuring stick inside of your own culture. Everybody got that? So it's the comparative type of mindset. Sometimes when we think about culture, when we think about aspects of ethnocentrism, first off, every culture is ethnocentric. Every culture. Sometimes we think of ourselves as Americans because of our sense of superiority as the only ethnocentric culture. That's not true. The Yanomamo from the Amazonian rainforest that have not made contact with the Western world, they are ethnocentric just like we are ethnocentric. They think that their lives are the right, correct way of doing things, and they look at an American's way of life and say, well, that's weird. Right? They wouldn't agree with the way that we live our lives. Okay? Every culture has a tendency to be ethnocentric. One thing that I want you to think about, though, is social class is really a culture, right? If you have an upper middle class or upper class culture, you have a middle class culture, and you have a lower class culture. There are social norms associated with each of those social groups, okay? And a lot of times what happens is you'll have cultural conflict when they come into, when the norms butt up against one another, okay? I'll give you a specific example. Sometimes in lower income type of families, there's certain types of vocabulary that's used quite frequently in those type of contexts. It's just the norm, okay? But when you come to school, school is an environment that is ran by middle, upper middle class type of individuals, the administration type mindset, and they have certain rules on the vocabulary that you use, right? So what happens is you're socialized to use certain types of words over the course of life, and all of a sudden you go to this different environment, and you're not allowed to do that anymore, right? It creates cultural conflict, okay? It's ethnocentrism. One is saying it's right, and one's, saying it's wrong, okay? Another example would be like the e-cigarettes kind of stuff, right? Cigarette consumption, tobacco consumption is usually more prevalent in the lower income type of environments. And so somebody that is using the tobacco, when they are told and exposed to some of this stuff, the research that's suggested with it, sometimes the response is, well, here comes another effort by these upper middle class people to teach us how to live our life the right way, right? And they take great offense to it because of where it's coming from, okay? For survival, do humans rely on instinct or culture? Instinct or culture? What do you think, Mr. Donovan? Culture is correct. In this classroom, the answer is always culture, right? You would think about it, what if we took culture away? Would we be able to survive? We've got so dependent upon the culture that we live in. It's kind of like a safety net that's propping us up, that's keeping us going. Without it, it would be a struggle, okay? And I don't think that we realize it. You want to write down Carl Sagan's name for this last slide. I'll get to it in just a second. I don't think we realize how much we depend upon culture, right? Our lives are pretty cushy today. We don't have to think a lot and worry about a lot of things because we're really already taken care of for us. I was reading a book to Preston the other day. It happened to be about Dwight Eisenhower. He's picked out some picture books associated with some presidents, and so we were going through that one, and he had a son. His first son, is back at the beginning of the 20th century, got to about 3 years of age, and then he died. He got sick, and he died. He died of scarlet fever. And so Preston was like, well, what's scarlet fever? Are we susceptible to having scarlet fever? Stuff like that, right? He's got a cousin that's sick right now. Does she have scarlet fever? He's overly concerned with that. And I said, no, we don't really have to worry about those things anymore, right? We have vaccinations. We have other type of medical treatment that kind of takes care of that, right? So, think about what life would be like 100 years ago. How much difference it would be, right? How much more of a challenge it would be 250 years ago, right? We've got a lot of things taken care of based off the culture in which we live. All right, Carl Sagan. So he's asking that question. If the answer is culture, that we rely upon culture rather than instinct, the question is, how old is culture? Right? You may write that question down for Carl Sagan. How old is culture? Is culture really, really old, or is it really, really young? Okay. And so he created this metaphor. He took a calendar year, and then he did some specific events in history, and he identified where culture comes from on this large scale. So from the beginning of time, from his perspective, that's all the way back in January, then you go through all the months, all the way to November, and then you get December, You get to December, you start breaking it down a little bit more specific. He says that around, again in his metaphor analogy, December 24th, just before Christmas, you got the dinosaurs, right? Pangea is 26 days later. But then you got to really wait until December 31st when you get the good stuff, right? For example, the Great Pyramids. This is the one that I want to highlight. The Great Pyramid construction, when civilization, we consider it to be an advanced civilization, one of the first in the region of the Middle East, right? An advanced civilization, that is on December 31st, 23 hours. So that would be like 11:59 at night with about 50 seconds left. With about 10 seconds left in the year. So what is he saying? If we think about this ancient civilization being the beginning of culture, how old is culture according to his analogy, according to his metaphor? Is it really old at all? No, it's not. According to his perspective, it's relatively young. Relatively young, okay? And so that's the purpose of his calendar there, okay? But cannot overemphasize it enough, how important culture is. I get these global culture students, they come in and we start talking about culture and how important it is. Their eyes roll back in their head. It's not that important. And we talk about cultural influences, how it affects our behavior. I make my own decisions, right? Is the mindset that we have. We're not aware sometimes of how much of an impact the culture we grow up in has on our behavior, has on our mindset, has on the way that we interact with other people around us. Any thoughts? Questions? Nope. There's some big stuff in there. Ethnocentrism, Carl Sagan, the herd mentality stuff, non-material, material culture, all that stuff will show up on the test a little bit later on. Sound good? All right, you guys got a few moments here. Hang out. I appreciate your attention. I know that was a lot of help. Try to stay away from doing stuff like that. At the end of class this morning, we were trying to take a different approach to how should we take shaming and curb the behavior in the parking lot. What could we do to make it more effective?
Say the names of the license plate.
Say the names.
Like the license plate.
Who has no license plate?
Say it again.
I said, who has no license plate? I don't know.
Right.
Everybody doing this. So.
Yeah. So you're saying that everybody already knows?
Yeah.
So then that means, I thought of the idea of I like that map idea, right? Just take a picture of the parking lot with the map, and then you highlight the spaces, the cars that are out there, you highlight them, say, everybody knows who drives what car for the most part, right? And then you can see who's been not parking in the right spot. So that's maybe a start. But at the same time, we've got to get everybody on board with the shaming aspect of it. Otherwise, it could, again, have the boomerang effect. If you see the map and 15-20% of the parking lot is highlighted, it's just going to reiterate that idea that there's a lot of people doing it. One more is not necessarily going to matter, right? We'll have that mindset. I might as well park wherever I want, okay? So it's a challenge with that, right? You got to make sure that the shaming is effective to get people to conform there, right? So I imagine there's a pretty good solution to that, but I don't have the
What do
answer.
you think would be the best solution, Mr. Roy?
I don't have the answer. I'm afraid that
Slash my tires, maybe.
somebody said gave candy to the people that. But you know what? I said that doesn't work. That's reinforcement. That's rewarding.
Recording stuff you already.
And they talked about that in the attribution theory, right? They said that giving
Oh, no,
candy
I talked to Chris.
is
He
not
said
as
he's probably
effective
gonna
as using
text-
the
or
attribution theory.
Not Tyler, David that day off.
All right, you guys have a good one.
Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday. Is it?
No.
Coach,
Yeah,
I'm still so not ready for having to go to practice.
at 6 o'clock in the morning.
That's
Yeah.
usually when I wake up. Our whole day.
Yeah, that'll be tough. I'm not gonna lie to you.
I'm hoping I give you nightmares. No! You're giving me freaking daymares. Daymares. And even though the thing. Well, it is.
That's psychology's book.
Oh,
No more school teacher spell Rick. No more. No more. No more. No more. No more. I brought something. It's cold water. I don't need that because I read it. It's water. It's just no.
Will the following students please report to the assistant principal's office? Sarah Carlson, Sophie Brosner, and Elias Scott to the assistant principal's office.
I will.
I will.
thank you, sir.
Not good anymore.
Yeah. Well, you can vary. I've been open to a lot of suggestions today. There's Ben. You have your corrections. No. You need to print out your 2 paragraphs again, and you need to proofread it, and you need to make corrections. Okay? You need to do something. Okay? You lost your sheet that I gave back.
Well, you're not afraid to say it.
We're having a pizza party at first. Yeah, I don't know the time yet.
Well, you're not.
Would you like to retake the math quiz this afternoon?
Hi, Brad.
Would Eliza Scott and Sophie Brosner please report to the assistant principal's office?
Alright guys, 10 questions. Make sure you're writing them on a separate sheet of paper or on your Google Docs. Let's go, Bradley.
Yeah, it is so
Yeah.